Charlie, do you want to? Because I've actually heard of that book before on Tim Ferriss's podcast. It's been mentioned several times. I haven't read it yet, but like many great people that I've noticed in just studying podcasts and history, it seems that this one book really influenced you and your philosophy.
Yeah. So it's funny because we were chatting about how you were in London and you interviewed Sean. Well, I went to London this last summer and did a show called Renegade Inc., which is on RT. You can find it on the RT website and everything. But it's a show done by a guy named Ross Ashcroft, who is the writer and producer and director of a documentary called Four Horsemen that came out in 2011, and it sort of details the economic collapse. And so I was in London and we were recording this, and then the cameras weren't rolling and we were just chatting, and he was asking me about my book and how it came to be. And I said, well, John Perkins who wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman, was a huge inspiration to me, because I was going through this. I was living in Las Vegas doing real estate, and I was out on a vacation, and somebody gave me that book to read, and just on my vacation. And I was so into it that I was having it was a scuba diving trip. And I remember being underwater diving and thinking to myself, I'm excited to get up to the top, because when I get up to the top, I get to read another chapter of this guy's book. And so I'm explaining this to Ross. And the reason why I'm explaining it to Ross is because in Four Horsemen, John Perkins plays a huge role in his documentary. So we're chatting about that and everything. And I'm just telling how I'm inspired. And then we get into how my book came about, and that I chose to write it in total secrecy. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell my friends. I didn't tell my mom. I didn't tell anybody. And part of the reason was because, like when you take on like a new task and you're like, oh, I'm going to go do this, or I'm going to go do a podcast, and you tell all your friends, and then maybe you don't really do it, or you do a couple things and then it fizzles out. I didn't want to be on the hook for it. So part of the reason was I just didn't tell anyone, because I didn't want that sort of obligation. I didn't want people to say, hey man, how's that book coming that you're working on? And then have me not actually write it. So I didn't say anything about that. And I also was afraid that if I said something about it, to my wife, she'd tell me to stop working on it. Like, oh, this is pointless. What are you doing? Don't waste your time on this. So I wrote it in secrecy. So I'm explaining this to Ross, and Ross says to me, John Perkins wrote his book the exact same way. And I was like, whoa, really? He's like, he didn't tell a soul. He didn't want someone to stop him. He didn't want word to get out. He didn't want any. And I was like, okay, cool. So, all right, well, we've got a little bit of that in common. And
that's awesome.
But the thing about his book that really struck me, it was that when he's describing, so he worked for a company called Maine, which is like Halliburton or Bechtel. It's a multinational engineering firm that goes in and rebuilds. They don't build houses. They build dams and freeways and airports and things like that. They build major construction projects. And so his job was, he worked for this company that was like a Halliburton, and he would go and get introduced to like the presidents of countries. And he would say to like the president of Ecuador, you've got the right sort of layout here and the right geography with these rivers running through, that if we put like a dam here, you could build like a hydroelectric power plant, and it would generate all this electricity. And yeah, it would cost a little bit of money, but it would pay for itself. And then you'd have all your people would have electricity. They could learn to read at night. It'll be great. And, like they sell all these benefits. Oh, and by the way, we'll put some money in your pocket too. We'll make it worth your while. And so these countries are like, sure, like, well, we can't afford it. And he's like, don't worry. We've got the financing all set up by the World Bank and the IMF. They'll come in, they'll take care of you. You don't even have to worry about. So these countries sign up for this. They take out this huge multi-billion-dollar debt to build this thing. And then so they build the dam and it starts generating revenue, but it doesn't generate enough revenue to cover their payments. And they start to fall behind. And then they approach this country and they say, you owe us a lot of money for this dam and you're not paying us back. And they're like, well, it's not penciling out. And they say, well, we think we have a solution. Maybe what we can do is we can work this out. You guys vote our way in a UN resolution, vote the same way as the United States does, or you let the US put a military base here, or you privatize your lumber industry or your fishing industry and let our buddies buy it. So what I'm reading this book, and this is 2007. spring of 2007. And what I realized is that I'm living this on a smaller scale in Las Vegas because I was in real estate and I was selling new homes. So I was, people would come in and want to buy a house, and we could get them qualified for a loan. Like the guy that I remember specifically was that there was a guy that came in and wanted to buy a house that was $405,000, and the guy picked oranges for a living. Like he really honestly picked fruit, and he was like a landscaper, so he landscaped things and he would pick fruit and all that stuff. And we qualified him, like we got him qualified for a loan. And I was like, this guy can't afford it. Like, and this poor guy is like, well, I guess I can afford it. Like, you wouldn't be offering it to me if I couldn't afford it, right? So
he doesn't know better.
He doesn't know any better, and I don't blame him because he's just like, hey, I'm gonna, he's a guy from Mexico who came over and he speaks a little bit of English, and man, this is going to be the American dream for him. He's going to like get it started with this one house, and everything went wrong, and the market tanked, and the banks took back all these, they loaned out all this money to these people, and then they took back tangible assets like these houses. And I was like, oh my God, like it occurred to me that I was involved in this. I didn't.
That you were a cog in the machine.
You got it. And I didn't realize it until reading John Perkins' book. And so then after that, the market sort of tanked, and I'm still, I don't live in Las Vegas, but I still work in Las Vegas real estate. I just kind of go back and forth and manage a real estate brokerage from Denver. So I'm still involved in real estate. Of course, I'm seeing sort of some very alarming things right now